Hello, I'm John Grom, and welcome to our 140th Right and Left Discussion Forum. We hold our televised discussions twice monthly to demonstrate the value of civil, productive, open-minded political dialogue. Today, our panel will discuss a topic that we have visited twice in the past, climate change. A recent resurgence of interest in this topic has caused us to want to take another look. Many legislators and potential presidential candidates have recently signed on to something called the Green New Deal, which calls for the elimination of the use of fossil fuels in the next 10 years. Opponents of the Green New Deal fear that it would lead to an economic collapse. Today's panel taking on this topic, beginning on my left, is Patty Haskins, member of the Wadsworth City Council. On her left is Bryan Laubaugh, president of R&B Financial Services, and on his left is Dr. Ronald Chamberlin, retired senior research chemist. Patty, I think most people would agree with the scientific observation that the Earth is approximately 200 years into one of its periodic warming cycles, and that in the last 100 years our planet's temperature has increased approximately 1 degree Fahrenheit or 0.74 degrees centigrade. Do you think that we now know enough as to the cause of global warming and the potential solutions to take on the aggressive actions called for by the Green New Deal?
I think we know enough to recognize that there are problems, that there is an influence and effect into the, as far as climate change is concerned, cause that is man-made, that it's something that we can do about. I heard somebody recently refer to the Green New Deal as a hopeful idea, not necessarily a plan. I really seen few people that are totally in favor of it. I think that what we need to do, though, is to address the problem. And I do think that we know enough about this to recognize that perhaps we need to do a carbon tax, that we need to invest in green energy in some way, shape, and form, that we need to perhaps, because I know this is part of it, to rebuild infrastructure with that is less carbon intensive in order to cut our carbon footprint. You know, this whole idea of converting from fossil fuels to renewable energy is what we can do to curb climate change as it presently occurs. There are those that don't even think that it's happening, but all you have to do is to look at the polar ice caps and see what's happening there and how they are breaking up and diminishing. I saw someone just recently on TV that was discussing this, and he made the projection that by the year 2050, which, while probably not in my lifetime, will be certainly in the lifetimes of my children and my grandchildren, that the Mideast and portions of India could become too hot for people to even live there. So I think it's imperative upon us to start doing something now about it. The big concern is the cost, and that's what I hear. That new Green Deal, the Green New Deal, I guess is way, way out there in cost. But one of the things to consider is that while it is costly to make these changes, we are seeing tremendous cost because of climate change. If you look at all of the recent disasters that we've had, whether it's the increase in hurricanes, earthquakes, droughts, and the cost to our countries to make, to help with those disasters, I mean, that's far greater than the cost to make some of these changes.
But don't you think it's pretty optimistic to think that maybe we can make it all stop?
I don't know that we can make it all stop, but I think it's foolish to sit back and say, well, we can't make everything stop, so we're not going to do anything. Mm-hmm. I think it's imperative upon us as good citizens to do something to try to make that change and to at least try to diminish the cause of this.
Mm-hmm. Bryan has a smile on his face like he thinks Patty is...
I'm not an extremist, I'm not a denier. I believe that there are things that we can do to minimize some of the changes or climate change and stuff, but when you start looking, and they always say, a majority of scientists and all that kind of stuff, it's like that thing on the toothpaste, 7 out of 10 dentists recommend, this particular type of product. I'm not in favor of any sort of taxation when it comes to this kind of stuff. I specifically went, when they rolled out the Green New Deal, that day I went to their website, and it was not just little suggestions.
Oh, it's extreme.
It was
It's
very
really
extreme. And I was surprised that some of the people she got to stand around her that are willing to sign on to this.
Excuse me, is this something that Cortez?
Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez.
Cortez,
And I believe it was Senator Blumenthal that
and
proposed.
Markey, he was one of the sponsors in the Senate.
But is she responsible for having that Green New Deal written?
She put this out there. Her staff put it all together, and now
they must be as smart as she is.
Yes, they're backtracking very quickly. They pulled it all down, but all the things that you're hearing about killing all the cows and no more planes and trains from coast to coast, and now they're sort of disavowing that we didn't mean that. We just want people to fly less, so we're going to have a coast to coast high speed maglev train. Well, California just scuttled their, I don't know how many billions of dollars they were into that thing before they decided.
LA to San Francisco.
Right.
Afford it.
Yeah, they never got that thing going. But I know that there are things that we can do. We can be good stewards. We can do our best to minimize and maybe expand the renewables of our energy portfolio, so to speak.
Yeah.
I don't think you're ever going to get rid of petroleum. You're never, ever, because there are developing countries that depend on a cheap source of fuel. China is building coal plants faster than you can shake a stick
But
at.
they're also very rapidly developing renewable capacity.
They are.
Exactly, yeah. So this notion that somehow 10 years from now we're all going to be riding bicycles to the train station, it's never going to happen, I believe that individuals like Elon Musk with electric cars, those are good things. When you talk about solar, they're good in certain parts of the country. When you talk about wind, those are good in certain parts of the country. But when it comes down to it, we get the not in my backyard people. Yeah. The folks that
Which is happening in Virginia right now.
Exactly. Yeah. Virginia, up on the East Coast where the winds blow up around Long Island and stuff, those people don't want 300 windmills dotting their bay. Yeah. They don't want that. They want the windmills out in the hinterlands. They want them in Ron's backyard, in my backyard. And we're saying, no, wait a second, I don't think I want that. But I believe if you ever travel across the United States, there are windmill areas, out there in Iowa and Nebraska, there's nothing out there, and they probably have 100 windmills. They have
a lot of them in Pennsylvania, too.
Yeah, they have solar panel fields and all that kind of stuff. I'm all for that. But this notion that somehow we're going to come grinding to a halt because we're not going to be, they have basically said that petroleum is the enemy of everybody. Coal,
Yes.
I think we can use coal in certain areas. They have a variety of technology, and technology is driving this. They talked about oil and peak oil. That was a big thing. We're going to run out of oil. Then fracking came along, and we got more oil than you can shake a stick at. So, I'm not an extremist on this. I know there's things we can do to mitigate it, but the notion, Al Gore predicted that we'd be underwater at this point in time.
Yeah, at least New York would be.
At least New York would be underwater. I haven't followed. Miami's gone. I haven't followed the polar ice cap thing, but one of the reports I read was that they actually increased. There were certain areas that had increased in ice, and if the Earth is.
But it's thinner.
It's a little thinner, but if the Earth is how many? If Carl Sagan said it was billions of years old, how do we know we're not in some sort of cycle? I believe that
a lot of scientists believe exactly that.
That we have sort of a cycle going here.
Yeah.
It wasn't that long ago where we thought we were going to all be in the ice age. So Hollywood rolled out all the movies about the day after and all that kind of stuff. Now it's heat. the last one, I had to chuckle. It was, if your life has been disrupted by weather, that's climate disruption, and we can't have that. Well, I'm here to tell you, if you live in Ohio, it's going to snow, and your life is going to be disrupted.
We can make that stop. All we have to do is pass a law at the state
Well,
legislature.
maybe we all need to move to Miami or something like that. But
No,
Ron,
Miami's underwater.
they're underwater now. That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah, they're
no.
partying down in Miami.
I know this is a subject near and dear to your heart, Ron, so why don't you weigh in?
Patty gave a very nice summary, I think, and Bryan is about as cynical as I expected him to be.
I didn't think that was cynical.
I did some reading and thinking about, I'm going to do a little mansplaining here, about it's called the geologic climate changes. There are several ways in which the Earth gets heated up, and weather, of course, is driven by uneven heating of the Earth's surface by the sun. About 40% of the sun's radiation gets through the atmosphere. Heats up the surface of the Earth. That heat then it gets re-radiated as infrared, and that's trapped by the so-called greenhouse gases, water vapor being the largest quantity, methane, though small, being 4 times as effective as anything else, and carbon dioxide. There have been periods of time in the Earth's history when somewhere around the late Cretaceous, as I read.
No, I'm sorry, the late what?
Cretaceous. That's when all the big plants were there and the coal deposits got formed, and that era, way before anything else. A great deal of continental drift was going on, and the rift zones were opening up, and a lot of volcanic activity. Even today, there are about 1,000 active volcanoes on the Earth, and any given day, about 30 are erupting.
Putting in a lot of CO2.
CO2, sulfur dioxide primarily, and water vapor.
Yes.
The eruptions are caused by the water vapor, really. Once the gas gets released and the water heats up from the rocks, boom, steam.
Yeah.
So that caused a tremendous amount of CO2 and SO2 in the atmosphere. Now, the Earth has certain amounts of ways it can compensate and equilibrate on this. The CO2 and the SO2 get rained out, go into the ocean. They're acid gases. SO2 forms sulfuric acid, CO2 carbonic acid. This acidifies the ocean. And during that period of time, there's a great die-off of marine organisms, so that you have places like several 100-meter thick cliffs of chalk in England and all the tremendous limestone deposits we have here. Those are the bodies of sea creatures that were killed by the acidification of the oceans during those particular times. Now, the exact chain of events is not really known, not really certain exactly what came when and so forth. So this goes back and forth. The Earth heats up. The Earth's orbit is not circular; it's elliptical. So when it's a little closer to the sun, it gets hotter. A little further away, it cools off, and then of course the year. I wasn't able to find out where we are at the moment. It gets more or less circular, more or less ovoid over periods of time. The tilt of the Earth gives difference in temperature and difference of weather patterns. That changes too, but these are changes that occur over millennia. These are thousands of years for this to happen, to change and come back and forth, go back and forth.
But Ron, when you think that the man-made component of the CO2 component of atmospheric gases is less than 0.3%, not the atmospheric, but the greenhouse gases, is less than 0.3%. How can it be having that kind of an impact on the cycle that you're talking about?
It's chemistry, John. That's what's happening with it. That's what happens.
That's small, huh?
That's small. That's all it takes. I think scientists have to be humble here. You might not expect for me to say this.
I wouldn't expect any scientist to say that.
But no, science works on probabilities. That everything you measure has a limit of error to it, a limit of accuracy to which you can measure. Right. Everything. In the present situation, since the advent of the Industrial Revolution, the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has skyrocketed.
Yes.
If you plot that out, you see
all the way up to
those
0.3%.
It's increased so tremendously in a very short period of time.
Yeah.
So the probabilities are very high. This has a tremendous effect to it. Now, as Ryan says, there are things we can do. There are things to do to ameliorate this. I agree with that. I don't know if it's a tax. I don't, the politicians like taxes, depending, no matter what party they're in, they like taxes.
Sure.
So,
As long as they're on somebody else.
yeah, as long as they're on somebody else.
Yeah.
I don't know what the solutions to this is, but there are certainly things we can do. There are renewables, electric cars. Well, I mean, you got to get the power somewhere. You got to burn something.
Yeah.
Now it might be nuclear. It could be solar. I'd sort of estimate that if you could go into the Southwest and put up enough solar panels to supply the country, it wouldn't take a whole big area.
You
that
know
much.
what? I worked out the math. It's about 0.6% of the land area in the continental United States to supply all of the electric energy.
So I
0.6 of
think
one-
the big
however, the problem is getting what kind of infrastructure would you need to get that energy from Yuma, Arizona to Boston?
Well, we got electricity from Niagara Falls to New York City pretty easily in the 1800s with
it's a
Nikola
lot closer,
Tesla's alternating current.
Right now, from what I can find out, the chief sources of renewable energy are coming from wind and solar, and that and it takes quite a bit of infrastructure in order to. In fact, that project in Virginia that is causing all kinds of problems with environmentalists, 6,350 acres of land to put in 1.8 million solar panels. And somebody raised the question, what happens when a new technology comes along and makes it obsolete? What does it cost to decommission 6,350 acres of solar panels? Now, if we want to, the Green New Deal calls for us to become completely dependent on renewable energy in 10 years' time. But we can only think about the technology that we have right now to do that, and it takes a tremendous amount of infrastructure and impact on the environment. Then a new technology comes
Well,
along.
Henry Ford didn't wait for the advent of turbocharged diesel trucks to build a Model T. That was a technology at the time, and it was sufficient for the time. It gradually grew into that.
But it didn't take thousands
John,
of-
I think probably the difficulty here is political will, not necessarily technology.
You know, and again, the cost to remediate, I can't think of the word this morning, the cost to take care of the problems that are created by not addressing it, by the disasters and so forth, can outweigh those costs. You know, but my big problem is that, I think we first have to get people to recognize that a problem exists. I mean, presently we have a lot of politicians who will not even recognize that there is a problem. And once they recognize there's a problem, then we could start discussing ways to
And I think the
improve
problem
the
is
situation.
that they've politicized the issue because
Exactly.
the only
That's the
solution, the only solution that the extremists, the environmental extremists have is you tax the bejeebers out of industrialized countries. I mean, trillions and trillions, you basically bankrupt them. You throw out these ideas like in the Green New Deal that somehow, you're going to starve your country and in 10 years you're going to be all renewables. There's never sort of a midpoint that we can reach, because the environmentalists, as you mentioned, they want everybody, they don't want, their feeling is, mankind has created this, so we got to get rid of mankind. When you go onto some of those websites where they talk about, reforestation and the cities need to be turned back in the forest and all that kind of stuff, and they're not happy with just driving around in a Prius. They basically want you walking, and those particular people take over certain aspects of the left and the right. You've got some folks over there that are talking crazy, instead of coming into the middle and saying, what can we do to mitigate this and move in the direction that doesn't, bankrupt people.
When you when you listen to some of the supporters of the Green New Deal, you get the idea that we're not doing anything at all to generate renewable capacity, which is very, very not true.
I think they're more saying we're not doing it fast enough.
Well,
enough.
look at these numbers. Worldwide, we're spending about $500 billion a year on research on renewables. Now, granted, only 56 billion of that is in the United States, but most of it's in private enterprise. But we are doing something. And as a matter of fact, between the year 2009 and 2015, wind and solar energy capacity increased at a rate of more than 100% a year.
But unfortunately, our present administration is not looking forward. No, they really aren't.
I knew you'd get around to that.
Well, but it's true. I mean, when you're pushing for more coal to be produced within the country, which it's actually not happening, and you drop out of a climate change agreement and you refuse to discuss these issues, that's not the tack that we should be taking, I think.
Well, here's an example that the left, they don't like to talk about. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal that the state of New York is running out of energy. They're running out of oil and gas and all that kind of stuff, the natural gas that comes off of fracking. So, I mean, there's a lot of that.
Did they outlaw fracking?
They outlawed fracking, they outlawed all these kind of stuff. So they've got a shortage, and people are just looking at them like, well, you created the mess. You created this issue to run on it, and you politicized it, and now because you don't have it, you come screaming to everybody else. Well,
same as California.
Yeah, exactly.
So see, that's a case where both sides are politicizing it.
Exactly, and instead of saying, there's technology out there that needs to be developed where we can get at these, and Ohio has a very, robust fracking industry. Pennsylvania, all these others.
Some counties in Pennsylvania have outlawed it or put a moratorium on it.
Some have. And the technology exists, we just drill over and get that.
But I remember reading when we last discussed this in Oklahoma, because they're doing a lot of fracking there, but the number of earthquakes has increased like 1,000-fold. So unfortunately, there are some side effects of fracking that perhaps are not the most desirable.
I think one of the problems that we have that makes it say the word for me, politicization.
Yes,
politicization,
yeah.
Run rampant is the fact that we just love to find something wrong or something bad and blame it on somebody we don't like. And it's not bad enough just to blame them, but we have to punish them. And I think that's there's a big attitude that we've got to punish capitalism. We've got to punish large corporations for causing this huge problem. But the fact is that we're doing a lot. Large corporations are doing a lot. The government's doing a lot. It's moving along pretty fast. As a matter of fact, during the 2009 to 2015 period, wind and solar utility grade energy grew by 900%. That's a lot in that period of time. And in fact, the growth, the growth is 40 years ahead of the EIA, the Energy Information. I forget what the A stands for. Anyway, it's the government's main source of information about energy, the EIA. 40 years ahead of their projections. They had projected at one time that we would have 44 gigawatts, which is a gigawatt is 1 billion watts. And it takes, 1,000 watts to furnish electricity for one home, something like that. But that they projected 44 gigawatts from renewable energy by the year 2030. It grew to 66 gigawatts by 2014. So we're making a lot of progress.
I know here in Wadsworth we invest in both solar and wind power.
And the
Not a large percentage, but we
geothermal
have it.
is the high school, this complex that we're sitting on right now, powered with geothermal.
I think there's a geothermal component to it, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And I know that, well, in other public school projects around the state.
And it's built so it takes advantage of the sun, you know? And I think as far as, you know, I'm concerned, I'm for that kind of stuff. I'm for the build out as we move forward of buildings that are efficient. But this notion that somehow we're going to go in, as the Green New Deal suggests, and tear down and retrofit and all that kind of stuff, I don't think people realize how large and expensive it is. You just can't start printing money. And that was part of their funding, was that the Fed will just take on.
Did it actually say that we should all become vegans and get rid of all the cows?
That's Cory Booker. Cory Booker's a vegetarian.
Well, I know Cory
And-
Booker's a vegan. I've
yeah,
never heard him
yeah,
say that we need
yeah.
to get rid of all the cows.
Well, the whole problem was the
But I've heard-
methane of the cows. Well,
and I
weren't there
understand
great
that.
herds of mastodons that roamed the earth billions of years
Have you ever
ago?
passed a feedlot in Texas? You don't want to be there.
I've been past the feedlots in
Was that-
Kansas, I'll tell you that
I mean,
much.
did they actually say that? Because I've heard it cited on television.
Yes, it was in their
Like their
frequently
draft.
asked questions, and it was up for about a day and a half, and they took it down because it was just fodder for everybody.
I think maybe a point is, Johnny, you're talking about how the growth of the infrastructure and renewable energy is that you allow give business the opportunity to make some money in something, they're going to do it.
Oh, absolutely, and that's a great idea. Thank you very much, panel. See you in 2 weeks.